Thank you so much for coming on and doing this with us, Kyle. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I was just saying to Dave, it's been forever since the last time we saw you. I think it was like pre-pandemic, Chicago. Are you shaking hands? I don't know. Am I shaking hands? Like it wasn't what we could not have imagined where we would be 11 months later, 10 months later.
Yeah, well, okay. So you and I have not spoken about this since you saved my career.
I'm sorry, what?
You saved my career in Chicago. That's what I'm saying. Yes.
Are you talking about the right person?
Yes, because we were sitting next to each other all weekend at C2E2. But I've seen Dave since, and that's the second part of the story. So Meredith, if you guys don't know, is a mom. And sometimes you just need a mom. Okay? And at C2E2, I was very stressed out because I was in a lot of pain because I'm still dealing with some knee surgery stuff. And so conventions are just brutal regardless on my leg. And the night before, I had seen Tom Brevoort at who's a Marvel executive editor, whatever.
Yeah, right. Executive editor.
So Tom was my very first editor in comics when I was like 22, 23 years old. And so to this day now, there's still that aspect of like, but I did good, right, Tom? You know, like you want them to think like, yeah, I know how to write. You think I know how to write, right?
Dave still feels that way.
Yeah. Oh. So on like, I think it was like Friday night, I was at the, right after the convention, like in that like bar hotel area or whatever. And Tom had finished dinner. And everyone was like crowded around and everything. And Tom comes out and I see him and I was like, oh, how's it going? Et cetera. And so we knew they were announcing Ultraman the next day. And Tom's like, oh, so you're going to be at this lunch tomorrow, right? And I was like, no, I don't, I thought maybe we were doing something, but he's like, are you not on that email? Like we're meeting at this time. And all of these members from Subaraya in Japan, in Tokyo, were flying in for this announcement. Gosh. And we're going to do this lunch.
I remember you talking about this.
And I was like, no, okay. And he's like, yeah, it's me. And this is Tom talking. It's I can't do a Tom impression. Not like my Dan DiDio impression, but Tom's like, it's me, it's CB, and it's Jeff Gomez and from Starlight Runner and Danny Simon from the licensing group. And then like 3 or 4 people from Subaraya. They're so excited for the announcement of the book. And we're going to have this lunch. And I was like, well, I'm just going to sit back and listen. And he's like, well, you say that. He's like, but they've met me. He's like, you're the shiny new, object that they haven't seen before. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go home right now because, I was still learning about the brand and the property. And I'm realizing in my head, like, oh, we're announcing the book tomorrow. And before we announce the book, we're going to do this lunch where they don't know me. They've never met me. And I'm going to be the one basically representing their beloved franchise for kind of like the first time in the West. Yep. So the drive home, I'm like calling my co-writer, Matt, who's in Australia and talking through like certain talking points, touch points. And again, I was still learning about it, but I didn't want to come off like, a complete fool. Right. And that's where Meredith comes in because the next day I'm sweating this lunch all kind of morning and I'm walking around the convention and I walk by the yesterday's pin booth and they have these really cool pins. And I see them, and it's this. And it's the pin from Ultraman, the radio control. Right?
I remember that pin.
And I'm like, oh, I'm going to buy one. And then I'm like, oh, I bet Tom and CB would like one. So I'll buy one for Tom and CB as well. So I bought 3 of them. And so I'm like, well, I'm going to wear it. I'm going to wear it to lunch. Except they have these like really annoying clasps on the back that are... like you need like you actually do need like a little Allen wrench to tighten it.
Yeah, they're they're not like a regular pin. You have to unscrew it and screw back. Yeah.
So Meredith and I have been like joking around and giving each other a hard time all weekend at this point and having a blast. And so I put this pin on myself and I'm like trying to get it. And it basically looks like this. And I go, Meredith, how is this? And she just takes one look and she goes, come here. And she comes over and it was such a like quintessentially perfect mom moment. And you absolutely fixed my pin, you straightened it and you double checked and made sure it was straight. And you were like, go get them, and and I went in, and the first impression I made, they saw my pin, they're like, oh, that was the first product that we licensed, and totally it was like smooth sailing from there.
Oh,
so
that's awesome.
Thank you so much, first of all.
You're welcome.
And then the second time the last time I saw Dave, we were in Mexico City together. It wasn't clear at that point in time whether we were going to get home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember calling in a panic. Dave, you need to get on an airplane now.
It looked great, and she was calling, and I was talking to you. Mark Silvestri was there,
Yep.
and everybody was saying, "Oh no, it's fine." And by Saturday, we were all
very stressed out.
Yeah.
Well, especially because I didn't tell. It was such a last minute show that I agreed to do. I don't know about you, but I was like, well, I could do one more show, and it's not, they were saying it's not bad down there, but I'm definitely not going to tell my mother that I'm flying to Mexico City. So I'm down there. No one knows I'm there. Like,
Oh my gosh.
and this is exactly why I didn't tell my mother that I was going. And she's back in Illinois, and she doesn't know. She assumes I'm in LA. She's texting me photos from the news about O'Hare Airport in Chicago, because it was like overrun with people in like 9-hour pools of like seas of humanity just waiting to get through, because there had been like the shutdown, or there was like mixed messaging from Trump about like if people from Europe were going to be able to get back in. And so it just created chaos. And so we're all looking at Dave, Mark, and I had lunch together each day with Kat and some of the other people at the table. And we're all like looking at these photos like, is this what we're going back to? But on that Saturday, I was working on, we were in the middle of the first issue of Radiant Black, which is the new book that I'm doing. And you can see the background here in the video. I'm sure we'll talk about in a second. But Dave, you and I have known each other for a long time. But like Mexico City was amazing, because we had never really gotten to spend that much time together to just talk and chat about different things. And so we were on the bus driving to the convention one morning, and we were just talking about art and storytelling and comic book artists that we both love. And Marcelo, this is kind of his first big book as an illustrator, and he's coloring himself as well. And so he was sending layouts in, and there was this moment with this train, and the layout just wasn't, I couldn't put my finger on how to give the note. It just wasn't working. And I was like, Dave, can I show you this? And you looked at the layouts, and you were like, first of all, you're like, well, he's a really good artist. Like, he can draw.
Yeah, incredible. Like, absolutely.
You just spotted it. And we're looking at this, and you're like, well, I bet the train, you know what? The train comes from overhead, and you could do this. And then he's like, when we get to the show, like, just when we get to the show, I'll show you. And so we get to the show, and there were like people waiting for Dave to sign stuff. And Dave said, oh, come here. And he pulls out a piece of Bristol board.
Oh, he still has it.
You have it? This is the worst drawing. Yeah. Terrible.
And
terrible
he does
drawing.
this layout. And I sent it to Marcelo. Of course, I still have it. I sent it to Marcelo, and Marcelo was, first of all, blown away that David Finch is seeing his artwork, and second of all, was so grateful for your thoughts on it and notes. Oh, sorry, now my cat is trying to get into my record player cabinet.
Oh, you're getting to my last question first.
Oh yeah. And so that actually is, if you see the book, that's the finished page.
And really, by and large, because I saw layouts for quite a bit of the book, and I mean, he's an incredible artist, very dynamic, and also great with layouts. But I know this just from starting. There are shots that, if you've never done something quite like that before, it can be tough. And
well, he's gotten better and better. Like we're into issue 3 right now, and he's still coloring himself, but we're going to bring a colorist down probably for arc 2, because it's just so labor intensive. But the last thing I want to say is that, Dave had offered about a year ago when we were all in New Orleans together at that show, and I was telling him about the new book. It was just the early stages. I just gotten designs in. Dave was like, it was me, Dave, and your son, and who likes Power Rangers. We were kind of talking about Power Rangers while we were eating pizza. Yep. And Dave was like, and I'll do a cover for you. And he's like, and I'll actually do it. And I was like, okay, that would be amazing. And then after Mexico City, the same thing. He's like, yeah, I'll do the cover. And then we were chatting afterwards, and there was like there was a scheduling conflict. Meredith and I were talking about like, oh, we don't know if it's actually going to work. And like a few weeks later, out of nowhere, Dave just emails me a cover, and it was like, It's the coolest thing ever. I can't thank you enough. And that cover, as you've probably seen on the web, like it has meant so much to the book. Like people are using it in all of the press, all of the interviews, like the key art. That's the image. And so like I might cry even just talking about it. Like this book means so much to me, and it's a brand new superhero. And I firmly believe the best way to validate a brand new character like that is when someone like yourself, you know, lends his talent and his graphite to it, because it further cements and shows like, hey, this is something I should pay attention to as a retailer, as a reader, even just other pros, you know? So thank you guys both very much. That's my long-winded intro.
Pleasure. Yeah, I'm sure.
So
just
course,
with
you
all
said, like, will you come do the podcast? Like, are you kidding? Like, of course I will.
I'm sure with all of the work that
It was all because of the pin.
Stop interrupting me.
Probably. It actually, Dave, it absolutely had nothing to do with the cover. It was the pin. I didn't want to actually say it in front of both of you, but
I understand. It's all right. I get it.
I played the mom card. Mom card always wins.
I had a segue, and it was going to be good.
Oh, yeah, that's all right.
Instead, I'm just going to do it this way.
This is the story of our life.
no.
So, when did you get in comics, and what was your first work? And was comics what you originally wanted to do?
Well, you know the answer to that one.
I know.
So I've loved comic books my whole life. Comic books and filmmaking are kind of like and the Chicago Bears are like the three things growing up that I was really obsessed with. And comics and filmmaking really kind of fueled each other. Like I got into reading comic books because of the Richard Donner Superman film and Tim Burton Batman film, and some of those animated series in the early 90s as well were very much my gateways. And so I started I was 7 years old, and I was making Superman and Ninja Turtle and Power Ranger films with my dad's Hi8 camera. But making comics, aside from a brief period in like junior high and early high school, I never thought like I could do that. Like that was ever a viable thing whatsoever. And then I made this movie in college called The League, which is a big superhero noir about a superhero labor union of 1962 Chicago. And it's 27 minutes long. It was my big swing, shot entirely on film, tons of visual effects. I have a big background in post-production and sound editing, graphic design, visual effects as well. I was a post supervisor for a long time, in college and then freelance after that, and a sound editor for like 10 years. And so I knew how to put the movie together, especially on the back end. And this is in 2007, 2008. So like I said, we shot on film, which makes the post-process even more complicated. And when I put the movie online, I had a friend of mine, now a very good friend of mine, but at the time it was just an artist that I hired because I liked his style. He had a very Silver Age style in the movie set in the 60s to design all the superheroes, all the characters. And his name was Eric White. And when we finished the movie, I showed it to him early, and he was like, he really liked it. He was very impressed by it. And he was like, do you have an agent? And I was like, I'm 23. I just graduated last month. Like, no, I don't have an agent. Like the movie's not even done yet. You know, there's still some green screen shots. And when it was finished, he did one of the coolest things ever. He sent out an email with a link to the movie to 200 people, everyone he knew in film, TV, and comics.
Wow.
And it really started my career. And I signed at a big talent agency and a management company, and I did the water bottle tour, and I was up for some big movies and stuff like that. But I was pitching for like $90 million movies at like 23 years old. And
oh my gosh.
Like, I'm glad I didn't land one, and no one was going to give a 23-year-old $90 million. But everyone was waiting for me to bring in a script that I wanted to make that, you know, even at a $40 million budget is what a lot of, there were some like studio presidents and vice presidents that were saying this. And I'm going like, I don't know how to do that. Like write a whole movie. Like how, did you see my short? Like, I can't, you know, but what was happening while that also was going on was, just to backtrack, the very first email I got when I woke up at like 7 o'clock in the morning, after Eric sent out his mass email, the very first email I got was from Joe Quesada. Wow. On a total whim, Joe clicked on the link and watched the whole movie. And so I started pitching to Marvel for about a year, and under Tom Brevoort, and I landed an issue of Captain America, a one-shot. And then I got a one-shot for the Avengers. And then I met Mike Martz at DC, and I really owe my career to Mike. Like Mike really championed me at DC in late 2010 and then going into 2011. And I was there. I did Gates of Gotham under Scott Snyder. And then that led to the New 52 and Deathstroke and Nightwing. And
Nightwing, yeah.
That was kind of, that was it. Yeah.
Is Nightwing still your favorite?
All time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
there's a giant Nightwing poster behind me here
Yeah.
that Chuck Dixon and Scott McDaniel signed to me when I got the book in 2011. And you know what's really cool is that we're recording this today. DC just announced the new creative team on Nightwing, which is Tom Taylor, and forgive me, I don't remember the artist's name, but the first cover they put out is stunning. And I don't know about you guys, but like I can't read books that I used to write, especially something like Nightwing. It's like trying to stay friends with an ex, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I'm more that way than you because you've developed a relationship with that character.
Yeah.
And you don't want to see what somebody else does with them.
Yeah. But the announcement today, and I messaged Tom immediately, and Tom's a good friend, and I'm so excited for them because you can just tell in the first cover, it's like, oh, they get it. It's going to be awesome. Like this character hasn't had with no disrespect to the other creators that have worked on him over the years. That is a character that is really tough to do at DC. There's just something about him, and there were certain opinions from certain editorial about him and what he should be or shouldn't be. And so it was really, really tough to do anything like as kind of hopeful and optimistic and kind of like dynamic as I think you can do. And so I'm like massively jealous of Tom that he gets to come in and do this. I would have killed to be able to do it, but I'm also incredibly excited and I will absolutely buy it. I will absolutely read it. And that's the first time I can say that. I mean, I left that book / was fired 6 years ago. And this will be the first time that I'm actually going to absolutely pick up Nightwing and read it again.
So here's a question for you then, Kyle, because the idea behind this show that we're doing is to talk to people about their process. And I think one of the aspects of the writing process that is maybe the most mysterious, and I would say even still for me as somebody who's worked in the industry, is the pitch. So let's talk a little bit about how you approach pitching to Marvel or DC or any other publisher. Are you one of those, like, you just go in and throw like 500 spitballs at the wall and see what sticks? Or do you go in with like one like idea, like I have to have this character needs to do this? Like what's your process for that?
Well, I think I would actually say, like, to step back even further, and it kind of depends on the situation. Like, is it okay? I can give you actually two wildly different examples. So when I was starting at Marvel, I could not. I say that I pitched for about a year before I landed that Captain America one shot. I pitched like 20 stories, like fully broken stories, like outlines for one shots or oversized one shots or minis. But I was pitching cold, and that's kind of what Tom told me to do. And it was around, pitch 15, I think, where I was like, there's got to be a better way, right? Yeah. Like, because I would pitch these things. And at one point I sent in a document with 10 fully broken things. And I'm thinking like, well, one of these has to go, right? And what happened instead was it was like, oh, we have something for that character already. We're doing this or this or this. And but these three, and I've passed them on to the appropriate editors. I'm going, well, that's not going to go anywhere. Like, the appropriate editors don't know who I am. Like, they don't have a relationship with me. And so what you quickly realized in that process was like, if you're looking at what's on the comic book stands and you're trying to figure out story ideas or possible pitches for work for hire characters, in this situation anyway, you're kind of screwed if that's the way you're approaching it, because any idea you're having based on what you're seeing on the stands, remember, like, publishers have planned out 6 months to a year in advance. Right. So someone's already had the idea you're having based on what's currently being published. So what I started to do, and I don't think this really applies anymore, but back then, Tom had a Formspring or a live journal. I think well, he had both. I think it was Formspring though at the time, where basically he would answer questions and like rapid fire. And so you could read, and he would update it like every couple days or every day sometimes. And so people would ask like, oh, are you ever going to do anything with Captain America doing a whatever, and he would say like, well, stay tuned, And I remember somebody asked him, will there ever be another Supreme Power series? That was a J. Michael Straczynski and Gary Frank with John Sabal and Chris Sotomayor book. And I loved that book. And Tom wrote back, he's like, there's no plans for those characters. And I was like, really? So I was following it to see if I could glean any information that would give me like, oh, they don't have a plan there. That means there might be an avenue if I have a really killer idea. And so that's what happened. And I actually got that miniseries made, the Supreme Power miniseries. Now, conversely, I've tried to pitch stuff cold on characters where it's like, I think there's a place for this, especially now in my career where I have a better understanding, kind of lay of the land. And I'm friends with, I know a ton of people and I'm friends with a lot of creators. And so I can kind of feel out like, hey, what's going on in Gotham right now with regards to this? Like, could there be something there, whatever. But by and large, I find that cold pitching on stuff like that tends to be a little bit of not a waste of time, but it's like playing the lottery.
Right.
So instead, what I try to do on stuff like that is like, I'm looking to see, and I'm asking the editors, like, what do you need? Like, is there something you're looking for or a character you need to take for? And then that kind of gets me to the second thing, the second kind of component of it. If they come to me with something, with a character, or we'd really like you to do, a mini series in a whatever. Neil Gaiman has a quote that I really like, where he was like, if you are asking me to write a story and you're like, write whatever you want, you'll never get a story from me.
Right.
But if you ask me to write a story about like turn of the century broom closets and the magical hexes related to them, it's like, well, now you've created parameters that I can actually iterate within.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's kind of the thing for me. And then from there, as far as like what I actually pitch, I'm very, very, very obsessive and kind of like meticulous about exploring a concept to its fullest potential. So taking an idea and finding a way to look at it that gets me the most interesting kind of thematic narrative and certainly, hopefully, emotionally resonant kind of possibilities. And so the best example I use for that I cite this a lot, one of my all-time favorite movies is Memento. And Memento, on concept alone, is great. Like, it could have been just a really great kind of cheap rip and run Lionsgate movie, right? Like, it could have just been on concept alone. It's a guy who can't create new memories, who's trying to find the man that killed his wife. And he can't create new memories because the accident where this person that killed his wife, that whole situation damaged his brain. And that's literally his last memory. On concept alone, awesome. Okay. But then they go, well, when Nolan says, okay, and we're going to tell the movie in reverse order so that the audience is as confused scene to scene as the main character is because of his condition. Well, now you're exploring that concept in a little bit more of an interesting way. But where the movie really kicks into another gear, and I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but like halfway through the movie, there's this scene where Guy Pearce's character Leonard hires a prostitute, and they're in this like seedy motel, and she thinks like she's there to sleep with him, and he's like, no, I'm not into that. And she's like, well, then why am I here? And he pulls out this brown paper bag, and he pulls out these items, and he says, I just want you to take these and just place them around the room like they belong to you. And it's like a hairbrush and an old tattered paperback and a clock, and she does. And remember, it's told in reverse order, so we've seen the scene that I'm about to describe before the context scene of this that's given. And then just like, we're gonna lay down in bed, wait for me to fall asleep. And once I do, get up, go to the bathroom, and just shut the door. She's like, that's it. And he's like, that's it. And so you've seen that scene where the door shuts and he wakes up and he looks around and he sees the clock and he sees the hairbrush and he sees the tattered paperback. And for just a second, he thinks his wife is still alive because these were all her items.
Right.
Now you're exploring the concept in a way that is saying something about just kind of the human experience, the condition. Like, he's manipulating himself through his own condition. Like, so now you took this concept and you found this really interesting kind of three-pronged, way to explore it.
It's such a huge risk for Christopher Nolan to do. I don't know if you ever saw that movie.
No, I didn't.
I watched it. Must have been 10 times. Yeah.
It's
Somebody
awesome.
Who actually taught me a lot about that was Scott Snyder.
Oh, yes. That's great.
And I know you've done work with him as well, like, because you guys all worked in that sort of Gotham universe.
Yeah.
He's genius at that. And I had the opportunity, I think while I was writing Wonder Woman, to audit. DC was doing those courses for new writers. And because I was still relatively new to the industry, I had the opportunity to audit that. And Scott was like, if this is your theme, how can everything in your book reflect your theme? How can the very first page, the environment, the family, like everything, the clothing your character is wearing,
Right.
how does that reflect the idea that you're trying to explore? And I really credit him with exposing me to that concept, and which obviously, we're very similar now. Thank you to Scott for me to you. I didn't start writing like you did though. I was like, I have a science degree. So.
Well, actually, okay. So then from the logic standpoint, you'll really appreciate this as well. I think I just did a Reddit AMA like yesterday or the day before tied to Radiant Black. And I got this question about building characters. And somebody asked me one time on a panel how I built characters, and just kind of off the cuff, I said, I start with archetypes and then I add shit I hate about myself. Yeah. And I was kidding, but not kidding. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this question, kind of a similar question in this AMA the other day, was about building characters and finding stories for them. And I said, well, that's not how I typically do it. I said, that's very much an inside out approach. Like a lot of writers will build characters and then try to find stories for them. And I've never been that guy. What I do instead is I'm outside in. So I start with a concept or an idea, and I've gotten better, over the years, I've gotten better and better at kind of like refining the process. But I start mostly with a concept or an idea, and then I build a character that is designed to explore what I find interesting about that idea. So the contradictions in the character or the flaws in the character are specific to what I think is the most interesting thematic, emotional, or even just narrative kind of angle on the concept. And then, of course, at a certain point very early on, as I'm doing that, I'll start, okay, but who is this person? And I'll start building it out. And if I find something there, I'll adjust the concept. And it kind of goes back and forth that way. But I find that starting that way is the logic, like the technical side of my brain, the science side of my brain going like, okay, it's a puzzle. Like I need to tell a story and the characters have to reflect what I want to say, but it can't feel contrived. And how do I do this without being a jumbled mess? It's like, I find starting that way is best for me.
I'm totally dominating this conversation. I apologize, Dave.
Well, okay, I have a comment then.
All right.
Because I have done creator-owned comics, which means I've come up with characters before.
Yeah.
And so behind me, this is my character from Ascension, So it's 1997. Anyway, I wanted to draw Ripclaw at the time.
Yeah.
And they were not comfortable putting out Ripclaw. They just canceled it. And I had just left Cyberforce. So I wanted a character with claws.
Mm-hmm.
And I just found Rick
This
Barry.
is how an artist develops a character.
Rick Barry is a fantasy painter who I think is incredible. And I got a calendar with some of his art in it. He had this really great looking angel. Anyway, I wanted to do an angel, basically. So I did an angel with claws, and that's my character right there.
That's
awesome.
awesome.
How I came up with a character. No story, and actually, unfortunately, the book really reflects.
But at the same time, like you and I talked about this in Mexico City. One of my best friends, Ryan Parrott, who runs all the Power Rangers books now, it's very funny to us because we were, I wrote Power Rangers for like 3 years. I launched that book. I built it out. Ryan then wrote the second book, and we got to team up together for the Shattered Grid event and do this event together. Ryan and I went to college together. Like the fact that we both ended up doing comics. I mean, I brought him on Gates of Gotham because when Marks gave me Nightwing for the New 52, he was like, you got to bring a co-writer on. Because Scott and I are both credited on Gates, but I mean, Scott will say, like, I wrote Gates. Yeah. And then on issue 3, it was like, no, we have to bring another person in because the higher ups were like, Kyle has 2 books with the New 52 now, like, and I had a thing at Marvel, and it was like, you just got to bring somebody else in. So now there's like 3 writers on the back half of that book. But after that, Ryan, like he was J.J. Abrams' assistant at the time, and they were like, wait, what do you mean J.J.'s assistant is writing Batman? Like, do you want to write some Star Trek comics? Like, and he's like, do I? Well, then the Power Rangers editor, Daphna, loves Star Trek. So they met on a panel, and then she ended up hiring him for the book, not knowing we were as close as we are. But anyway, super long-winded, there was a long walk to get to the point of, he said something to me, and he loves your art too. He said something to me like 10 years ago that I've never forgotten. And he goes, in his opinion, 90% of a character working in comics is the design, especially when it comes to a hero or a villain.
I think that's true.
Spawn, like any Silvestri stuff, like think the characters that the Winter Soldier, like characters of the last like what 25-ish years that have 30 years that have stuck around, they all have just a killer design. And it doesn't matter how great the interpersonal stuff is, it doesn't matter how great the backstory is, if there's not a killer design, it's not going to work.
You could tell a story that is incredible, and I think people forget this sometimes. Comics is a visual medium.
Yeah.
And if you can't get people to pick your book off the shelf or turn open the first page, it doesn't matter how fabulous your story is, nobody is ever going to read it.
And yeah, I always say, I think the best character designs, like Batman, you can tell just from the ears. Spider-Man, you can tell right away with the webbing. My favorite, probably recent character, relatively recent, is Hellboy. If there's one character I wish I could say, I could turn back time to right before Mike Mignola created Hellboy and then, create it myself.
Yeah.
That would be the character. And you could see in a silhouette, you could absolutely
who it is
pick out.
So I was just going to say that the silhouette thing is huge to me. Like I remember when they did the 2017 Power Rangers movie, I was like, how did you guys screw up these costumes so bad? And you can see that it's like when you have more than two colors, I can see the notes. I can just see execs weighing in and going like, well, what if there was purple veins going through the whole thing? And it's just like, I call it, well, I'll say it note. Normally I would drop an F-bomb here. I call it note F-bomb, but I'll call it note screwing for kids. They note screwed it. They gave so many notes that they just completely screwed. It's like you have one of the most iconic silhouettes of the last 30 years of a Power Ranger.
Yep.
In the clean helmet, the
black, like it.
This very spherical helmet. And pick a pose, and everyone knows it's Power Ranger. Like, how could you screw that up? And the other one, my friend, you guys probably know him, Declan Shelby. He's an artist, and he's a writer now as well. But when I first showed him Radiant Black, because when I got the design from Marcelo right before that New Orleans convention, that's why I was so excited in New Orleans, because I was like, I know this is good. Like, I know this costume design is good. And I remember showing Declan. Incredible. I showed Declan right before C2E2 on a phone, and he's looking, he's like, he's like, this is great. He's like, look, and he made it on the phone. He's like, it reduces down even at an inch, at the size where it's just an inch big, it still reads. Yeah. He's like, people like to do a lot of design in like the face or the mask. He's like, no, he's like, it's all black. You've got the little eyes, like, and they're expressive eyes. Like, it's clean. You can see it from a mile away. Like, he's like, I really think you've got something with it. And
that's awesome.
So
we're going to talk about Radiant Black, but I have to let people know, if they don't already, you created a character in Power Rangers. Like, you really introduced a brand new character in the universe, and they loved him so much that he's continued on, so much so that Isaac knows who he is.
Wait,
our youngest son.
We haven't talked about that. Does he really? Isaac does?
I knew who he was, and I barely watched the Power Rangers.
Barely, you don't.
I don't watch it. It comes through osmosis when he's watching it. But am I gonna say it wrong? Probably Lord Draken.
Sorry,
I knew I would say it wrong. I say people's names wrong on the stream, so people just expect it from me. But I was like, oh my gosh, I knew that.
Yeah.
So, you didn't create a small character. You created a major character in the Power Rangers universe.
And it's always very cool for us when we can say, I know the person
I know that guy.
Yeah.
I know the guy who created that guy.
Dave drew him too. Dave did the cover for that variant that we did for with comic sketch art for the Shattered Grid event. And I remember Daphne was so when they told her, because we coordinated that through like, I guess, sales and marketing. I don't remember.
I think Comic Sketch coordinated it through us, right? Because they were doing all kinds of like exclusive covers for comic shops, and so is going to sign it, and you're going to sign it. And
but what happened though is like they then told Daphne this was happening, and Daphne messages me. She goes, "How the hell did you get David Finch to do a Lord Draken cover?" And I was like, actually,
I just know people.
I know people. Yeah, Meredith's a friend. That's how. Actually, but to your the conversation about plotting to theme or building to theme, that character is actually a really good example of what we were just talking about. And I can keep this really short. When I came on that book, I often say, like, I didn't write Power Rangers as it existed. I didn't write it as I remember it existing. I wrote it as I remember it making me feel. Right. So it was like this complex, huge scope, interstellar drama with high school clique drama as well, and relationships that are just as compelling as the monsters and the battles and the action. And you go back to the show and it's not what it was to me when I was 8 when it came out, right? But I tried to build it with that same kind of sentiment in mind. And so my way in was, because I didn't want to tell new origins, and also with it being a licensed book, I've done this long enough where I was like, trying to reinvent origins is just a recipe for what's the term? Note screwing. It's just a recipe. You're inviting a lot of extra notes and work on yourself. And sorry, I'm cutting my own hair. That's the point we're at in quarantine. And I just came back from physical therapy. Now I can see on camera, and it's like, oh boy.
It looks fabulous. You did a great job.
It's
if you're doing that yourself, grade 9 me needs pointers.
But anyway, so my way in was, okay, if Power Rangers is about the strength of friendship and teamwork, like at its core, I'm going to explore that through the lens of a new member joining the team. And in the show, the Green Ranger joining the team, it was just very like, he was evil, he tried to kill them, he was brainwashed, he tried to kill them for 5 episodes, and then the spell was broken and he just joins up. And he's like a full-fledged member of the team the next episode. And I remember that when I was trying to find my way in on the book, I was like, oh, I know how to do this. Like, let me just build that out. I'll build him like the Manchurian Candidate, where he's still hallucinating Rita, but you don't know if he's actually like still talking to her and connected, or if it's his own self-doubt and kind of a form of PTSD. Like, how do they view him and how does he view himself? And that insecurity and that self-doubt was the engine for the first year of the book. So what that meant was, I knew going into arc 3, I wanted the culmination of that story arc for him to be him facing his kind of dark mirror, like, greatest threat, right? And so what's the greatest threat that speaks to his insecurities? When they said I was allowed to do alternate timelines, it was like, well, I'm going to build a version of him that's older and that never turned good. He chose to stay evil. So if our Tommy beats that one, that's the way that he can kind of quash some of that self-doubt and then feel like, oh, I can't do it. So it's cautionary. It's the cautionary tale, right? Well, it was just going to be like an evil White Ranger. And then as we got closer to it coming out, Saban very rightly were like, hey, why don't you actually make it a new Power Ranger, make it more ownable? And so then I built him out with the backstory, and then Jamal Campbell did the designs, and then I named him Lord Draken. And then it was like a rocket ship, like just kind of took off. But it truly just came from character going like, okay, I need Tommy by the end of the first year. And it went a little long to feel more comfortable, like, hey, I can do this and I do belong. And the best way to do that was to build this cautionary tale of when he didn't. Right. And it was all kind of built like with that in mind.
I know that you're going to want to move on and talk about Radiant Black, and I want to do that.
I am going to.
Before I let you do that,
by the way, I love
you did a short for Power Rangers.
Oh yeah. That was Jason, David, Frank, and I put that all together. He and I were really close back then, and he was texting me as the character was picking up. This is before Shattered Grid was going. It was a couple months before we knew it was gonna drop the first issue. And he was texting me, just going like, dude, we got to do something with Lord Draken. We got to do something with Lord Draken. He's like, I'm doing the cons. Like, everybody's asking about Lord Draken. Lord Draken's huge. We got to shoot something. Got to be the first ones to shoot something. And I'm going, I'm writing the official book. Like, I can't go make a fan film. Like, I can't, like, I can't do it.
Maybe I can.
And then I thought about it and was like, I know how to do it. I know how to do it. We could do it as a promo for Shattered Grid and build it. I just saw the whole scene in my head where it's like, oh, all of these he's observing portals into eras that he's about to go take his armies to conquer. And we can use footage from 25 years of Power Rangers to represent the eras that he's going to go into. And it can be a celebration of Power Rangers, but also I can twist reverse, because you're going to see Jason in the throne and you're going to think like, oh, it's Tommy. And then you realize like, oh no, it's like an evil Tommy, an older evil Tommy. And I knew how to do it. And
awesome.
then it became this process of like talking to Saban and convincing them to let us go do this. And they got behind it. And we built this huge set. And it was a 1-day shoot. It was 10 shots, and every shot was a VFX shot. And we cut it in a day, and then did all the post on it in 3.5 weeks, including all the VFX shots. Color graded it. My sound supervisor did all the sound, and we had it live within 4 weeks of shooting it.
Wow. That's incredible.
And it blew up. Like, it did 12 million views in 2 weeks.
It's the freaking Power Rangers. All right, so let's end. We have 2 more questions, because we have to talk about Radiant Black, and then we have to talk about your cat.
Oh yeah, he's hanging out.
But let's talk about Radiant Black first.
Sure.
So let's talk about Radiant Black, and because this is your baby right now. This is the thing that you're passionate about. It's foremost on your mind. It's like what you want everybody to know about. I want to know, where did you come up with the idea for the project and the character? And again, let's talk about sort of your process of finding an artist to bring what you had in your head onto the page, and how that whole process has looked for you.
Well, the idea for the book started kind of when I was on Power Rangers, in spirit anyway. And when I left the book, and really the brand, and I've kind of talked about this a little bit, so I don't feel too uncomfortable bringing it up. We came pretty close to doing a live action series for the Coinless and Lord Draken that I was going to showrun and direct as well. And Hasbro ended up buying the brand, and everything got put on hold. And then ultimately, they went different directions, and as there was their kind of prerogative. But so when I kind of decided when I left, I had this idea to do something as like kind of a 6-issue, like almost like far future dystopian kind of story. And it would be something that was it was more like Lord of the Rings, in that it was 200 years after the world had been saved. And the kind of iconography I had was I wanted to do something with miniature black holes, because I just thought aesthetically it's really interesting. I haven't really seen that done before, especially like as I was learning more about tokusatsu. Like I hadn't really seen, as a source of power in any of the stuff. And so, and I also I'm fascinated. Well, Dave, you'll appreciate this too. Like, a black hole would actually look like it's facing camera all the time. So in live action, because it's a 3-dimensional hole. Yeah. So what you're actually seeing is the accretion disk. And you see in the on the stream right now in the background, the character, you see the circle he's holding, the black hole logo, right?
Yep.
That line that's through it is actually it's actually the accretion disk from the backside, like it's a lensing effect. Oh. And so if you were to come around it 3/4, it would look exactly the same. If you were to look at it from top down, it would look exactly the same. And so in live action, because I was planning, it's like, oh, maybe I build this as kind of like a live action digital series or something, because Jason and I had done the Lord Draken, the Shattered Grid short. And I'm thinking like, oh, that would be a really eerie effect, the camera coming around it, and it stays looking flat. Exactly. Like, oh, that could be really cool. So I do sometimes go like, oh, but wouldn't it look cool if, and then build things from that. So I had that stuff, and I had this whole backstory. And then I had the title Radiant Black, and I just thought I just really, really liked that title. And I'm usually not very good with titles. And so I had
the worst, so I hear you. They're the worst. I'm like, please, can't the editor come up with the title?
Yeah. So I had that. And then I was kind of building it again in the background. It's just kind of like maybe a 6-issue limited thing as a comic. When I just realized like, well, I'm not going to do it in live action. It should be a book. And so there was that going on. And then I worked on a pitch for something else where we never really did anything with it. It was actually a DC thing, but it was like so early stages, and it just wasn't interesting to me. But I spent a day trying to figure out a way in. And I had the thought of like, oh, a character moving back home. Like, well, that's interesting. That feels very kind of timely. And, a few years ago after, I had a really bad breakup in 2016 where like, we were building a life together or I thought we were, and, we'd moved in together and into her place. And then she went out of town on a job for 2.5 months. And she came home and like broke up with me, like second night back, and like, didn't love me anymore, couldn't do this. Here was everything, when people are like, it's not you, it's me. Like, she didn't do that. She was like, here's everything that's wrong with you, And, no. And so because I'd moved into her place, then I didn't have anywhere to live. So I had to move out, and I'm just devastated. And like, I'm still affected by it to this day, but I didn't want to get an apartment right away because I had to, because I was very, very kind of messed up. And I was like, I want to find a really awesome place, So I stayed on people's couches for a few weeks, and then I just did the most cliched white guy American thing. I just went to Europe and spent a ton of money in Europe. And then I was there by myself for like 5 or 6 weeks, and it was really amazing. Very, it was hard and in a lot of ways, but I'm really glad I did it. And on the way back, I was supposed to stop in Chicago, my mom was like, you're flying out of Dublin anyway, like just stay. I was like, no, I need to get back to LA. She's like, just stay a few days. I was like, okay. And so I was there, and like the second day I woke up, I was still jet lagged, and I came downstairs like 4:00 in the morning, and my dad was already awake. My mom and dad are both retired at this point, but my dad was in manufacturing for 45 years and he's a photographer as well. And he was up, and he's a very early riser, and he's like making oatmeal. And he's like, do you want some oatmeal? And I was like, yeah, okay. And so we just like sat, it was like this time of year too. We just like sat in the kitchen in like pitch black, eating oatmeal, and like, well, we had lights on, but like outside it was pitch black still, reading the newspaper, and just kind of talk. And for the first time since everything happened, it's not a gag reflex, but like when you have your heart broken, it just feels like you can't even swallow. That thing finally just kind of like released a little, and I just felt some calmness. And what I realized was like, I left home when I was 18. I went to Iowa for 2 years for college, and then I came to Southern California when I was 20. Every time I've been home, I'm 35 now. At that time, the scene I'm describing, I was 30. I just turned 31. So every time I'd been home since, I'd always said to myself, like, one day when I have time, I'm going to come back and I'm going to spend a lot of time back here, like with my family, with my parents, like live in the city even, because I never got to live in Chicago proper. And all of a sudden I looked around and I was like, I don't have anywhere I need to be. Like, I could do that right now. And so I stayed for like 3 months, and I like lived back in my parents' house.
Oh my! And your parents are probably thrilled.
I don't think they hated it. And so I was drawing on that, thinking of like, oh, like, okay, maybe I build a character who has to move back home. This was like the early stage of the DC thing. So then right after New York Comic Con last year, I have a good relationship with Eric Stevenson, who's the chief creative officer and publisher of Image. And I would certainly call him a friend at this point. And we were texting about something, and he was like, oh yeah, he's like, have I ever talked to you about, building an original superhero? And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, not like a Batman analog, but like something like very contemporary and like new. And I was like, well, I would kill to do that, but I figured there's no market for something like that. And he walked me through how Spawn was doing at the time with issue 300 and 301. And just in general, the idea of like building something that is for right now and doesn't have all the reboots and all the continuity, and just building something fresh. And I love those early Image superhero stuff. Like, I just love everything about
Invincible. Yep.
Oh my God, yeah.
A little later on, but
Is
it's
it?
still
Yeah.
phenomenal.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And I actually, during quarantine, I read that run because I'd never read it. I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but like during our quarantine here, I finally read all 144 issues and I smiled so wide. I got to issue 50 and there's Dave's cover of Invincible. And you could see in the letters column, like Robert was so thrilled that you like came to do the cover and it was pretty cool. So Eric's telling me this and I'm going, well, I have this thing, remember, like, because I had talked to Eric about it, like building out like the dystopian thing or whatever, and the title and the iconography. And I was like, why don't I just do it straight and do it? Some of the backstory I'd already thought of, like I could just do now, set now. And then on top of that, I'm going, okay, let's look at Spawn. Like, let's look at Invincible. Let's look at some of these creator-owned superhero books. And there was also another thing rattling in my head, and I'll connect these two. The thing rattling in my head was something I had heard Jerry Seinfeld say actually once in an interview. I think it was with Norm Macdonald, where he was talking about how the Seinfeld show had to end. And he was like, it couldn't have kept going. And Norm or whoever it was going like, no, the show could have grown with you. And he's like, no. He's like, that show was a moment in time. The foundation that it was built on was built around these 4 people being single, living in New York City in apartments, right? He's like, no one wants to watch the show where Jerry gets married and moves to the suburbs. Yeah. Like, the show can't grow. But if you look at Invincible, you look at Savage Dragon, like it's not even the original dragon in the book anymore. It's his son. Like, you look at Darkness, you look at Witchblade, you look at these characters, Spawn for sure. They're able to grow as the creators grew. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going, well, if I really want to do this, I got to put a lot of myself into this. Yeah. And so, at the time, especially, money's still not great. Okay. But like money was really bad like a year ago. And I'm going like, okay, like then that's what it is. Because the opening splash page of Radiant Black is the most existentially terrifying thing I've ever written. It's a phone screen with his bank accounts, and it's a checking account with $46 in it and a credit card with $38,000 of debt. And the word balloon coming off the phone says, "I'm sorry, Mr. Burnett, but your loan application has been denied." Oh, 4 pages later, he's moving back in with his parents in Illinois, in my hometown. So,
oh my gosh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So it really was this kind of merging of different ideas, but also going, how do I tell something that's honest and very personal? Because I think that's the only way that this will work.
Agreed.
So that's very long-winded how the ideas, I guess, formed.
I don't know what to say about it though, because we had this plan. This is going to be, half-hour interviews.
They're never going to be half an hour.
Well, and I'm thinking, okay, if it goes longer, I'll just cut it. I can't cut a word of that.
None of this is getting cut.
No,
the whole interview. We'll cut out the part where I went blah 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 blah.
Right.
That's the only part. So if people tune in later, be like, Meredith and Dave talked to Kyle Higgins for 60 minutes, and it was gold.
Oh,
it really has been. This has been great.
I would love it. Yeah, I mean, and it's the thing that's so cool about the book too. And I think, you could probably, Dave, you could probably tell, like, even when we were in Mexico City, like, well, even when we were in New Orleans, like, when there's an idea that I get excited about, my parents have said this to me my whole life. I've never been someone who knows how to just like I want to hit a grand slam every time I step up to the plate.
All or nothing.
Yeah. And it's like, take the double. And sometimes it would be better if I did. But other times I'm going like, no, like I know I'm going to take a big swing with this. I mean, we've gotten a bunch of covers done. I've called in every favor I have over 10 years of doing comics full time, going like, this is my swing. Like, this book matters to me. I know it's good. I believe in it. And we're trying to do some really different things with it as well. And so it's like, this is the one. Like, this is my, and I've done creator-owned books in the past, and I've believed in all of them. Yeah. But this one does feel different. And I do. And the other part of putting so much of myself into it as well. And I should say, like, the book's not about me, but there's a lot of me in the book.
But it's you exposing yourself as a writer. I totally get that.
Yeah, it makes it very honest.
Yeah, it does. It's an honest, maybe your most honest
Yeah.
and most raw work.
And the other reason for that is because I don't know, Robert has said this to me, but Eric has told me Robert has said this just kind of in general, like you can't pick your successes,
No.
you know? So I look at this and I go like, I can't guarantee this is going to work, but if it does work, I want to be able to write this thing for 10 years. And the only way to do that is if it's something it's like, it's as close to me as it can get, because then it can grow and change as I do. Yeah. And, Marcelo, just to circle back, how I found Marcelo.
That's what I was going to ask, because I know when we do our Monday night draw streams, everybody, like, there's a lot of artists that watch and they're like, I want to get work. I'm really curious. I know I've talked about how I found the artists from my books.
Sure.
I'm curious as to what the process was for how you found Marcelo.
So that one was it was so serendipitous, and it was one that took a while, because when I was building it out as a dystopian thing, I don't think he'd mind if I say it. Cian Tormé was going to draw it. Cian's an up-and-coming artist, Irish artist, who's amazing. And I actually helped get him his first DC work. I liked the stuff, and I facilitated through Alex Antone doing a 10-page Green Lantern story, and he killed it. And then he did more and more and started getting other gigs. And we would stay in touch all the time and talk about like, okay, well, when does he have time to do this? Like a 6-issue thing. And we were going to be able to make the deal work and everything. But at that same New York Comic-Con, it was like, they're offering me Batgirl, like a couple issues of Batgirl. And I totally get it. But what I had said for months leading up to that, because I was also kind of giving him my opinion or advice anyway, going like, at a certain point, you're going to have to decide if you want to do a creator-owned thing, like an image thing, you're going to have to turn something down, because otherwise it'll keep getting pushed off. And the other thing you have to keep in mind too is like how you have to start defining yourself. At least as a writer, I know this, and Dave, I don't know. I mean, I think you would be way better to weigh in on this from the art.
Well, you're finding that now.
What's that? That
you're constantly having to turn things down. Like he decided to take a shot and do an image project.
Yeah. But also,
that was,
it's not. I don't even quite mean that. What I mean is like, do you want to be the fill-in guy, or do you want to, as an artist, or do you want to be the series guy, And I've actually heard Todd McFarlane say in the past, like, you got to do a 30-issue like run on something.
I've heard that from, I didn't hear it directly from him, but I've heard people saying that, he said, you can do covers, you can do an issue here and there, but if people don't know where to find you every month, they won't really get to know you and become a fan. So
like, do you cite a book of yours at different points in your career that, looking back on it, you go like, I'm glad I did that 12-issue, chunk, or that, or however long it was, as the thing that shifted things for you at all?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
All of them. Avengers, Moon Knight.
Well, early on in Image Comics, I did Cyberforce, which was Mark Silvestri's Image comic. And that was a tough one, trying to take over after Mark. But it was great for me, and it got my name out there, and I did 15 issues. So there was that.
That's huge.
I did it. Definitely New Avengers. I did Ultimate X-Men. People don't remember that one.
Oh, no, I do. That was the first work of yours. I have it all. That was the first work of yours that I saw, because I remember also that was the first time I ever saw Dave Stewart's colors.
Yeah, and he is incredible. He's very, very good. I was lucky to get to work with him. And, but and it was also with Brian Bendis, who is obviously phenomenal.
Didn't you do some Mark Millar issues first?
I did. I think it was 2 issues. It might have been 3. I'm pretty sure it was 2 issues. Yeah. And he was just transitioning off the book, and so I didn't really get a chance to communicate with him at all. It was a bit more of a kind of passing. But yeah, with Bendis, he's a very generous writer too. So we developed a relationship, and so he wanted me to do Avengers. That one, I had a hard time on that book.
Really?
I really did. And it was, I had a hard time with fan reaction, It was my first real, we hate you kind of reaction, and I just didn't know how to deal with it. And so I would have been on that book longer, but I'm glad I did what I did. And I
Yeah.
think over at DC, it's got to be Batman. You know, Batman's good for anybody's career. So
I know. No one. I make the joke like when Mart's usually when I tell the story of like landing at DC, and it was like because I was working as a sound editor full time at that point, and I was like, I do the one shots, and then they start offering me Batman, and like nobody says no to Batman. So I was like, I'm gonna go do this, you know. But just to wrap this up, then, so like we're at New York, and Kian was getting these Batgirl issues, and I was like, dude, I totally get it. Like if this is like, there's no ill will at all. Like if you want to do it, but I will have to find someone else, you know? And again, it was just, it was really serendipitous. Is that even a word? Like,
I think it is.
Yeah.
We're writers. It's any word we want to use is a
right?
word.
So he at New York, he was like, okay, yeah, I think I'm going to do it. And like, we'll find something down the line together. I was like, great. And then it was like a week later when Eric texted me about doing it as a contemporary superhero book. And then I'm going, oh, wow, you know, okay. And so now I'm thinking like, who is good for that? And I know that I'm going to do, and I think Marvel had offered me Ultraman at that time as well. So I knew I was going to be doing that. And it's like, you know, Tom, when he first asked me about doing Ultraman was like, I know this kind of pigeonholes you as the tokusatsu guy, but do you have any interest? And I was like, I've been doing this 10 years. Like I've done 30 issue runs multiple times on properties. Like I'm fine being pigeonholed if it means I get work. Like I can carve out, because that's a niche that there's actually more coming. You know, there's that Ultra Omega book that James Herron's doing, and you know, obviously we're doing Ultraman, and there's still the Power Rangers books going strong. And now I'm doing Radiant Black, and there's a few others I know of that are out there that are happening. Giga, the Alex Pacnadel book. So it's like I kind of felt like, oh, there is going to be some more of this kind of the toku genre, which is the Japanese, like Super Sentai and Kamen Rider and Ultraman. Like that stuff is going to start permeating comics more. And it's like I kind of did it. I was kind of like the first one to really do it on Rangers. So if I can keep doing it and that stuff, like I'm okay with being that, you know, that creator. I think 10 years ago in my career, I would have been terrified of getting, you know, pigeonholed in it, but not anymore. And so I'm going, well, I definitely want to lean into some of those aesthetics. So it became a question of like, what artist is going to be good that understands some of those influences as well. And so the first person I talked to was Daniele De Nicolo, who I did Shattered Grid with. And he had just re-upped at Boom to do Tom Taylor's book, the Seven Secrets book. And so it was like, oh man, because that would have been so lights out for us to do it. And the way that then Marcelo came into the picture is that Marcelo was a colorist. And Marcelo colored this image book. That's how I met him, called Self-Made, that I edited last year or 2 years ago now. That Matt Groom wrote, and Matt writes Ultraman with me. Well, Matt and I met doing a Power Rangers podcast, and I realized he's a really good writer and he just wants to do comics. And so I've really kind of helped facilitate where I can. And the artist on that book, Eduardo Ferragato, brought in Marcelo to color, and we were all like, who is this colorist? Holy cow. You know, his stuff was stunning. And as I got to know Marcelo, because then he started working on Power Rangers books, in my head, I was mixing him up with another colorist that also worked on Power Rangers, Walter Beamonte, because they both also drew. They were colorists who also drew. And in my head, somehow I'd mixed up conversations because I knew Walter wasn't going to be available. But then I went back through Facebook Messenger and I saw that Marcelo had said months earlier he would be available for something else that I was asking about. Right. And so I just reached out to him and I was like, hey, like, I know you draw as well. Like, do you like Sentai or like this stuff? And he's like, oh, I love Super Sentai. And he knew all about Toku stuff. And I was like, oh, that's really random. And he's like, I can draw styles. Yeah. And so I was like, well, let's start with like, let's just see, like, let's try some designs and let's just see. Cause I mean, you know, the idea, someone who is a colorist but also can illustrate, it's a risk, not a risk, but it's a gamble because you don't know, like, you know, there's a reason they color full time, you know, usually. But I've had success with that in the past. Rod Reese was a colorist at DC for 10 years and we met doing Nightwing, and Rod quit his coloring career to illustrate Cowl, our image book. That was my first image book.
Yep.
And then Rod is now doing big Jonathan Hickman X-Men books, you know, like 5 years later. So I was looking at that going like, no, it can be like, it can happen. And so Marcelo did some initial designs and they were okay. But none of it, he and I both didn't feel like, it wasn't quite right or whatever. So I was in Nova Scotia, and I was in Nova Scotia actually right before the New Orleans show. So I actually flew from Nova Scotia to New Orleans, where we were all then together, and we were talking with, I was talking with you guys about Power Rangers and then the beginnings of Radiant Black. And the reason I was so excited is because a few days earlier, while I'm in Nova Scotia, Marcelo sends through a layout based on a conversation we had where I was like, it just needs to be, I hate to use the word iconic because everyone throws it around, but it needs to be iconic. It has to be like, strip it down, and it has to read small. And I cited a few different reference points of different superhero costumes that do that for me. And he sent through a design, and it was perfect. It's the book. It's what's in the book. And that's it. And from that, I was like, I stopped on the streets and I was texting it to all my friends. I texted it to Stevenson. I was like, look at this. And everyone reacted really well. And I just knew it's like, this is it. And so going into it, it was like, it was still a little like, okay, but how are the pages going to go? How is the storytelling going to work? And Eduardo Ferragato, who's the artist on Self-Made, is an amazing storyteller. And Marcelo was coloring him. They're very close. Early on, Eduardo was giving some layout notes as well, just to help, get different things I was seeing, but didn't quite have the vocabulary for graphically. Eduardo would then tell Marcelo how, or approach thing, or he would draw over something for a certain layout. And then Marcelo is he's a sponge. He's such a quick, learner for a style. Once we settled on the style, we were just off to the races. So
I think that is a sign of some of the most gifted artists that I've had the opportunity to see David helping or training or have worked with. And it's that you only have to tell them once.
Yeah.
And then they just they take your notes and then they just blossom from them. Like Jason Fabok.
Oh yeah, it doesn't just fix that one problem.
He fixes
any kind of related problem forever.
Yeah.
And
wow.
Yeah, Jay Fabok I say that all the time. No, it is Fabok.
Okay, I say
See,
it
now
wrong.
you're kidding me.
Well, I remember meeting Jay for the first time.
Tomato.
I remember meeting Jay for the first time with you at that Charlotte summit years ago, in that hotel, whatever it was, where they had us. And that was the conversation of Jay was just getting, he was about to explode.
Yeah.
And you could see it in the work, and you could see it and I remember you and I having that conversation about no, he's real close.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's always what comics is entertainment, and some artists just really have that ability to just, draw you into an image. And he had it before I ever started helping him. So, made it easy.
He did. All right, Kyle, here's your final question of the night.
Okay.
I promised it. I've been all night long. We're going to end every interview with this question at this point.
Okay.
Because
there we go.
Our cat Patches appears on our stream on a regular basis, around 9:30, 10 o'clock. And she did tonight too. She came down, she's and everybody in the stream's it's Patches. They can hear her meowing. They're it's Patches, it's Patches. So who are the animals in your life, and humans count if you need to include them?
I'd be doing better if there were some humans right now. I'll tell you, this living alone stuff during a pandemic is real tough. So this is, let's see if I can move the camera. This is Pierre. Where is he?
They're cats.
Oh,
They're never, there he is.
Hi.
Oh, look at how cute he is with his little white bib.
So this is my tuxedo cat named Pierre, and he thinks he's a dog. He's the most emotionally needy cat I've ever met. He's also the most vocal cat I've ever met. And he just wants to play fetch all the time. Wow. And we worked out a compromise where I put you can't eat Ultraman. We worked out a compromise where I put a towel on my desk, and sometimes he actually sleeps on it, as opposed to climbing behind my computer and pulling out cables while I'm on Zoom calls. I did a hit. We had a Kickstarter 2 months ago, and I did a 6 a.m. spot on the Chicago News because it was 8 a.m. back in Illinois.
Yeah.
And I had to lock him in my bedroom because a day earlier we were doing an interview, and he climbs behind my computer and he'll rustle cables enough that the mic goes dead. And so I just like cut out, and it's infuriating. So now
and you're like picking the cat and moving the cat.
Oh
picking
man,
the cat, moving the cat.
mean, something happened. I don't know why it took me so long to figure this out, but it was like if I put the towel down, most of the time then he's really close to me, and he's like, and as I'm typing on the keyboard, he's like chill. If there's no towel there, he's running around, he's climbing behind stuff, he's meowing at things. He's like, why are you not throwing an object for me to fetch and only bring back 75% of the way? Like, why I don't understand. So that's our quarantine compromise.
That's awesome. See, for Patches it would be paper. If I was working on something, writing something, she would totally sleep there.
I have so many photos of this. I do have the quick Pierre story is that, so my my ex that I had ruined my life. No. The ex that unfortunately it didn't work out. She had a cat, and
better things are coming. I just want you to know I'm divorced, and look at what I have now. So better things are coming.
Don't
I
let
have
that
Dave.
discourage
Is that what you're saying? I'll get a Dave.
You'll get a Dave.
I'll get a Dave. All right, that sounds good.
Oh yeah. There you go.
So she had a cat, and I loved this cat. And like I'd had a cat until second grade, and then she passed away. Her name was Squeaky growing up. And then we had a dog, and parents still have a dog. I love dogs. But this cat was like, he became my buddy. And so calming and just so chill. His name was Sylvester. He was a black and white. He passed away a couple years ago, I guess. But once, I like kind of reset my life, and I'm thinking like, I'm going to find this new apartment. I just spent all this time in Europe. I fell in love with Paris because I'd never been to Europe actually, outside of like Ireland. So I spent all this time in Paris, really fell in love with it. And I get this apartment, and I'm thinking to myself, like, eventually, like, I'd like to get a cat. Like, that would be cool. I think I'm going to get a cat. And I get this, this apartment is like a 1930s French Art Deco building that I'm in. Awesome. And I love it. Okay. I mean, you can kind of see like, here, I'll tilt. I need a longer cable. You can see like the crown molding.
Oh yeah. Beautiful.
You can see out here.
Oh yeah. It's lovely.
See what I mean? Yeah. So here's the problem. I happened to mention, I told my mom when I was back home for those couple months, I was like, I think I'm going to get a cat when I reset and everything, etc. Well, the fact that I mentioned it to my mother meant that then my inbox was filled with every single pet rescue listing that she could find. And so I had moved in here in January, and like after a few weeks, and like I'm like, yeah, you know what? I'm not actually. Daphne, my old Power Rangers editor, she was fostering a cat that I almost adopted, but it just didn't feel right. So I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna hold off. I'm gonna work on me, and I'm good for now. And then my mom sends me this listing, and she's like, this guy is a tuxedo cat named Pierre, and he was born while you were in Paris. And I was like, and he was 6 months old, right? And I was like, well, I should meet him. And so my sister was in town, and so we went and met him. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm totally getting this cat, and adopted him. So
I love it.
Never in a million years did I think I would end up with a tuxedo cat, considering, because it almost like feels like it's a replacement cat of my ex's cat because he was a tuxedo. And I was like, oh, that's kind of weird. But I only called him Sylvester once accidentally, and now he's my buddy. I've had him for 4 years.
Oh, I love it. You know, I'm a big believer in faith. I have a very strong faith, and I just think there are no accidents in life, and that call it providence, call it divine intervention. You get what you need when you need it, and it is not sometimes the universe or God or whatever you want to call is not subtle.
Yeah,
they give you a tuxedo cat named Pierre, born when you're in Paris.
The writer in me appreciates the I don't know if it's symbolism, but it appreciates the lack of nuance.
Sometimes you need to get hit over the head with a baseball bat.
I guess. So I tweeted the other day, we could do a whole other hour on pets, but I tweeted the other day that my cat likes to eat at 5 a.m. so he can vomit at 5:02. It's the little things.
This is our cat.
Hello.
Anyway, before we start talking about our
he's
cat,
a little pig. He inhales it and then throws it up. It's like,
we really could do a whole hour just on
except
cats.
that we can't.
Except for Dave's
That's a different.
at that point. It would be the Kyle and Meredith show.
That's the different YouTube channel that you guys are starting in 4 to 6 months. Yeah.
So Radiant Black is coming out, I think is February 21st. Is that?
February 10th.
February 10th.
So it'll be out February 10th. Final
Through
order
Image?
cutoff. What's up?
Through Image.
It's through Image. So it's available to pre-order right now through your local comic book store. Or if you go to our website, which is just literally radiant.black. There's no .com, nothing. It's just radiant.black.
Wow.
Perfect.
You can pre-order the book through our site through either Golden Apple Comics or in Los Angeles or Challengers Comics in Chicago. There's also a link to find a local comic book store near you as well. And there's a link to pre-order through Comixology if you prefer digital. But basically, I wanted to give some options and not to play favorites with stores, but those are two of the biggest supporters of my career. And they both do mail service as well.
Oh,
so
great.
wanted to make sure there was a direct link I can just give people. Like, you can go buy the book right here, you know?
Right.
Well, I'll make sure
and as creators, we live and die by FOC. So pre-order is really important for us.
I'll make sure to put a link in the description so that's
Oh,
in there.
great. That'd be great. And actually, your cover is for issue 1, so it's the 1 in 25 cover, and we're running it virgin, so there's no dress on it.
So we won't just promote it when this interview comes out, but we'll also promote on the stream so people know that it's coming out and they can order it.
Thank you. And I'm happy to come on anytime and ramble some more at any point.
You're so much fun. I just want to say,
really been great.
I
knew this would be great,
never
but-
doing interviews as the guest again. I'm only ever being the host because this was so much more fun.
Oh, thanks. This was awesome. And I'm just glad we were able to hang out and talk. And you probably don't want this in the feed, but I knew I liked Meredith from the first time we were all in that elevator in what show was that? Was that Toronto? It might have been. Oh, it was Toronto. And one of you had the kids with you, and one of them, it was very clear, had tried your last nerve. And you were barely holding on, and I just saw it. I saw it, and I was like, "Oh yeah!" Like I recognize that look. And the next day, you said to me, like, "Sorry, it's a mom thing." And I was like, "Oh no, I get it." There was like 6 hours of backstory leading up to that moment.
Oh yeah,
it was awesome.
So true. Oh, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us, Kyle. It has been fabulous, and we will absolutely have to do it again.
Anytime. Thanks so much, guys. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Kyle. Okay. Give your cat scratches for us.
Always.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.